Hi everybody, welcome to this week's lessons in POS 201, Introduction to Politics. Today we're going to be looking at critical or otherwise known as non-traditional approaches to examining global politics. So in today's lesson we're going to be looking at a variety of different theories. We're going to look at Marxism, critical theory, constructivism, feminism and gender theory, postmodernism, and postcolonialism. So when we look at Marxism, Marxism often is preoccupied with looking at domestic politics, but there are several major strands of Marxist theory that are relevant to our study of global politics. And these include dependency theory and world systems theory. And we're going to go into more detail about what each of these mean. So when we look at Marxism, one important aspect of Marxism to keep in mind is the idea of false consciousness. And we've talked about this a little bit in the past. According to Marx, the ruling classes in capitalist democracies, or we might describe these individuals as the bourgeoisie, present their own interests as completely natural, desirable, and inevitable to their subjects, also known as the proletariat. Essentially, the bourgeoisie manipulate the proletariat into thinking that capitalism is both desirable and beneficial. And again, when we talk about the bourgeoisie, we're talking about the merchant or property-owning classes, and when we talk about the proletariat, we're talking about urban laborers or the individuals who work in factories for the bourgeoisie. Now, both Marx and Engels suggested that capitalism has spread globally through imperialism. So as we've discussed in this class, we have the European powers who are conquering much of the globe, and they're bringing both their political systems and their economic systems with them. So essentially, as the European nations conquer the globe through imperialism, they are bringing capitalism with them. Lenin suggests that imperialism is the highest form of capitalism. Essentially, the capitalist countries buy off their own working classes with welfare reform, but the only way they can provide welfare reform to the working classes in capitalist systems is to then exploit the workers in a developing world, essentially by making sure that they're not being paid well and they're not receiving any kind of benefits that might be beneficial in their employment. So essentially, imperialism allows capitalism to continue because it allows domestically, it allows them to make their own working class happy while then exploiting the working class of the developing world. This leads to dependency theory. Dependency theory was developed in Latin America, and it suggests that an exploitative legacy exists between Western countries and developing countries. According to dependency theorists, colonialism never really ended. They suggest that peripheral countries, or the developing countries, continue to be exploited economically by the core countries, or the countries of the West, specifically the United States and the countries of Western Europe. So dependency theorists also suggest that political leaders and economic elites in peripheral countries conspire with the core countries to maintain the system of exploitation. Essentially, the political leaders in developing countries continue to get rich while most of their population lives in extreme poverty. They work with the developed countries to ensure that their countries can be exploited. World systems theory is very similar to dependency theory. It thinks of the world in terms of the periphery and the core. It also adds the concept of a semi-periphery. It suggests that some countries are between the periphery and the core, and examples of these types of countries would be Mexico, Brazil, and China. These countries essentially engage in some industrial production. They are not necessarily as heavily exploited by the core as the peripheral countries are, but they are exploited by the core. What makes them different is that they also play a role in exploiting the periphery as well. So these semi-periphery countries essentially are both exploited by the core and they exploit the periphery. Switching gears a little bit, there's another critical approach which is called critical theory. Critical theory generally views capitalism as oppressive. It is a very different focus on capitalism's effects on society than what we would regard as strictly Marxist analyses, and we see a wide range of explanations and prescriptions for social, economic, and political marginalization. Critical theory, as we think of it today, was the beginnings of it can be seen with Antonio Gramsci, who wrote about the hegemony of elites. Essentially, he suggests that the ruling classes maintain power and control by convincing the masses that their rule is natural, inevitable, and correct. This is similar to the idea of false consciousness by Marx, but it's very different in the sense that he suggests that the ruled classes, so what Marx would describe as the proletariat, actively allow themselves to be deceived. Okay, they realize that they are being ideologically manipulated, but they permit it to occur. They do so for a variety of reasons. It could perhaps be the case that they are hesitant to try to overthrow the rule of the elites. It could be that they're benefiting to some extent materially by the elites. They understand that the ruling class is actively trying to deceive them into perceiving that something about the capitalist system is natural, inevitable, and correct for their own interest, but they're not necessarily too interested in fighting that. Excuse me. Critical theory is deeply distrustful of the possibility of neutral theories in the social sciences. They suggest that theory is always for someone and for some purpose. Theories in social science for critical theorists are always reflective of the subjective values and interests of the individuals who develop them. Essentially, there is no such thing as objective knowledge. Researchers do not dispassionately and unbiasedly view the world. They're trying to advance some type of goal, some type of objective, and critical theorists suggest that there's no way that we can dispassionately examine the social world. To this extent, then, critical theory is very critical of realism. They suggest that scholars who study realism are really, in fact, trying to support the existing global order and the interests of individuals who benefit from that global order. And in essence, realism presents itself as being completely natural, the world as it is, but critical theory suggests that no order, realist order included, is natural, inevitable, or incapable of change. Realism attempts to present itself as being a natural world order, but really it does so only to protect the current powers that, the current interests that are in power and are benefiting from the status of the current international system. Essentially, all orders are humanly constructed and thus subject to change. Critical theorists also suggest that social sciences can't be studied in the same way as the natural science. As we suggested, they think it is impossible to develop objective theories. They suggest that analysts in the social sciences must instead view social phenomenon from the perspective of the individuals involved. Theory should be designed to emancipate individuals from a variety of constraints, prejudices, and exploitation. They have a vision of a post-state system of political communities that do not view themselves as including some and excluding others. In other words, we don't have a state system where individuals identify as being strictly within the United States or Canada or Mexico. Instead, individuals see themselves as being citizens of a larger world community.